For 3 years, I felt like I was constantly failing a test I didn't even know I was taking. It was a fog I lived in, constantly trying to decode my wife Sophia's moods, always adjusting my behavior to avoid her coldness, feeling like I was one wrong move away from being shut out. But then, it all became crystal clear. Not in a slow dawning, but like a violent crack in the ice, shattering everything I thought I knew. And the scary part? The moment I finally saw it, I wasn't scared anymore. I was free. It started, or rather, I realized it started, on a Tuesday evening a few months ago. I'm Daniel Hayes, 32, and I sell commercial properties in Austin. I had just pulled into our garage after showing an office space downtown to some tech startup guys who wouldn't stop pitching their crypto thing. I grabbed my laptop bag and walked through the side door into the kitchen, and immediately, I heard Sophia laughing in the living room. It was that specific kind of laugh, way too loud and completely unfiltered. The kind she only does with her girlfriends. She was on speakerphone, and I could hear at least 2 other voices cackling along. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was literally just standing there, pulling a water bottle from the fridge. But then Laura's voice cut through. "So, how do you keep Sophia so well behaved?" The room went quiet for half a second. My hand was still on the fridge door, cold air spilling out. Then Sophia said, "I control him with one thing." And all 3 of them burst out laughing like she'd just told the funniest joke in the world. I froze. I heard Chloe say, "Oh my God, same. Mark thinks he's so independent, but the second I go cold for a few days, he's like a puppy." And they all laughed again. Sophia then said something about how men are simple, how they'll do basically anything if you just use intimacy as leverage. Laura added that her husband stopped going to poker night with his buddies after she gave him the silent treatment for a week. They were trading tactics like football coaches comparing playbooks. One of them mentioned using the tired excuse strategically. Another talked about how going to bed early without saying goodnight makes them panic. And Sophia, my wife, the woman I'd been married to for 3 years, agreed with all of it, like she was sitting in on some masterclass about relationship manipulation. I quietly stepped back into the garage and sat in my car. Engine off, door closed. Just staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just heard. My hands were shaking, not from anger exactly, more from this creeping realization that was spreading through my chest like cold water. I started rewinding through our entire relationship in my head. And suddenly, every confusing moment made perfect, terrible sense. 6 months before, I'd planned a weekend camping trip with my brother, something we'd been talking about for years. Sophia had said she was fine with it. Told me to have fun, seemed totally supportive. But the week before the trip, she got distant. Stopped initiating any physical contact. Started giving me one-word answers. When I asked what was wrong, she'd just shrug and say nothing. By Thursday, I was so anxious about whatever I'd done that I canceled the trip, told my brother something came up with work, and suddenly, Sophia was warm again. Affectionate. Everything back to normal. I thought I'd dodged some bullet I didn't even see coming. But no. I'd just been trained. Or 3 months before, when I stayed late at work 2 nights in a row, finishing a deal that would have earned me a solid commission. Nothing crazy, just until 8 instead of 6 p.m. Sophia didn't say anything directly, but she went ice cold. Started sleeping on her side of the bed, facing away from me. Stopped asking about my day. When I tried to talk about it, she'd brush me off completely. I spent the next week trying to fix whatever I'd broken, bought her flowers, suggested date nights, apologized for working late, even though she'd never actually said it bothered her. Eventually, she thawed out. I thought we just had a rough patch, the kind all couples go through, but it wasn't a patch. It was a pattern. I sat in that car for almost 30 minutes, just connecting dots I should have seen years ago. Every time we had a disagreement, even small stuff like where to eat dinner or which show to watch. If I didn't immediately agree with her choice, she'd withdraw. Not dramatically, not with yelling or slamming doors. Just this quiet, calculated distance that made me feel like I was constantly failing some test I didn't know I was taking. And intimacy, something that's supposed to be about connection and mutual desire, had become this weird reward system where I had to earn it by being agreeable, available, and obedient. If I was a good husband by her standards, I got warmth and affection. If I stepped out of line, even accidentally, I got coldness and rejection. And the insane part? I'd been blaming myself the entire time, thinking I was just bad at understanding her needs, bad at being a husband, bad at reading the room. I finally went inside. Sophia was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, completely normal, humming some song. When she saw me, she smiled and asked how my day was. I said it was fine. She said dinner was in the fridge if I was hungry. We just existed in the same space like nothing had happened, because from her perspective, nothing had. She didn't know I'd hurt her. She didn't know the entire foundation of our marriage had just cracked open in my head. I heated up some leftover pasta, sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, not really reading anything. She came over and kissed the top of my head before heading upstairs to take a shower. It was such a normal gesture, the kind of casual affection you see in happy marriages. Except now, I was wondering if it was genuine, or just part of the system, positive reinforcement for whatever I'd done right that day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling while Sophia slept peacefully next to me. And I realized I wasn't angry. I was something worse. I was clear. For 3 years, I'd been living in this fog of confusion. But it wasn't random. It wasn't my fault. It was deliberate. She'd been using emotional distance as a tool to shape my behavior. And it had worked perfectly, because I'd never questioned it. I thought that's what compromise looked like. That's what keeping your wife happy meant. That's how you maintain a peaceful home. But this wasn't peace. It was surrender. The scariest part wasn't what she'd been doing. It was that she probably didn't even think it was wrong. She learned this from somewhere. Probably her mom. Definitely her friends. Maybe every piece of advice that treats men like simple creatures who need to be managed rather than partners who deserve respect. I started thinking about what would happen if I just stopped playing along. What if I stopped shrinking myself to avoid her moods? What if I stopped treating her coldness like something I needed to fix? What if I just existed as myself and let the chips fall wherever they wanted? The thought was absolutely terrifying, because I knew it would either wake her up or end us. And for the first time in 3 years, I was okay with either outcome. I stopped playing the game on a Wednesday morning. And the weirdest part wasn't how hard it was. It was how easy it felt once I decided the rules didn't apply to me anymore. I woke up that day and realized I'd spent 3 years walking on eggshells in my own house. And I was done. Not angry done, not dramatic done, just quietly, permanently done with the entire system. Sophia was already downstairs making coffee, probably expecting me to come down and do our normal routine where I'd gauge her mood and adjust accordingly. But instead, I got dressed, grabbed my gym bag that had been sitting in the closet unused for 6 months, and walked right past the kitchen to my car. She called after me, asking where I was going, and the look on her face was like I'd just announced I was moving to Greenland. See, one of the first things to go when her control system started working was my personal routine. I used to go to the gym 4 times a week, but slowly, subtly, she'd make comments about how I was never home, how she barely saw me, how it'd be nice if we had morning coffee together. And like an idiot, I'd adjusted. I'd stopped going, told myself it was about being a good husband, about prioritizing our relationship, but really it was about keeping her happy so she wouldn't withdraw. Well, not anymore. I joined a gym near my office, signed up for a 6-month membership, and started going every morning before work. Sophia tried her usual moves immediately. The first few days, she went cold, gave me short answers, went to bed early without saying goodnight, the whole playbook. And I just let her. I'd come home, make my own dinner if she hadn't cooked, watch whatever I wanted on TV, go to bed when I was tired. And if she wanted to pout about it, that was her choice. The silent treatment only works if the other person is desperate to break it. And I wasn't desperate anymore. I was free. By the second week, she switched tactics because the cold approach clearly wasn't working. Suddenly, she was super interested in my day, asking questions about work, suggesting we watch my favorite shows. Being physically affectionate in this obvious, calculated way that would have worked on me a month ago. She'd touch my arm while we talked, laugh at things I said that weren't even funny, suggest we have a nice evening together with meaning in her eyes. And I was polite. I was kind, but I didn't take the bait. I wasn't being mean. I was just being honest. And honesty in a dishonest system feels like cruelty to the person who built the system. The real shift happened about 3 weeks in. That's when I told her I was meeting my brother for drinks on Friday night, the same brother whose camping trip I'd cancelled 6 months ago. I didn't ask permission. I didn't check if she had other plans for us. I just informed her the way you tell your roommate you won't be home for dinner. She got this look on her face, confusion mixed with panic, and she said, "Oh, I thought maybe we could do something together this weekend," with that slight edge in her voice that used to make me immediately backtrack and apologize. Instead, I just said we could do something Saturday and went back to reading my book. And I swear, I could feel the entire power dynamic in our marriage crack like ice on a frozen lake. She tried to start a fight that night. Asked why I was being so distant lately, why I didn't seem interested in spending time with her anymore. And I could have gone nuclear and told her exactly what I'd heard, exactly what I knew. But I didn't. I just looked at her and said, "I'm not distant. I'm just not asking for permission to exist anymore," and walked upstairs. That one sentence, I could tell, landed differently than anything I'd ever said to her before. Because it wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was just factual. I wasn't playing defense. I wasn't trying to fix things. I was just stating reality. The next morning, she was completely different, almost sweet in this genuine way I hadn't seen in years. Making breakfast, asking if I wanted coffee, trying to connect like a normal person instead of a puppeteer managing strings. And part of me wanted to believe it was real, wanted to think maybe she'd realized what she'd been doing and was making an actual change. But I'd been fooled too many times. I was polite. I thanked her for breakfast. But I didn't soften my boundaries. I still went to the gym. I still made plans with my brother. I still existed as my own person instead of an extension of her mood management system. Here's what nobody tells you about setting boundaries with someone who's been controlling you: they don't just give up. They cycle through every tool they have, trying to find the one that still works. Over the next month, Sophia went from cold to sweet to angry to confused to hurt, sometimes all in the same day. She'd accuse me of having an affair, because apparently the only reason a man would stop being controllable is if he's getting his needs met somewhere else. She'd cry and say she felt like she was losing me, which was interesting because she never seemed worried about losing me when she was the one creating distance. She'd try to be the perfect wife for 3 days straight, cooking elaborate dinners and being affectionate, then flip back to ice cold when it didn't immediately reset our entire dynamic. And through all of it, I stayed consistent. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't playing games. I was just being myself. I went to the gym. I saw my friends. I worked late when I needed to. I made plans without asking permission. And I stopped treating intimacy like something I had to earn through good behavior. When she was warm, I was warm back. When she was cold, I just existed in my own temperature. I stopped chasing her moods, stopped trying to decode her signals, stopped shrinking myself to avoid her disapproval. The weirdest part was how calm I felt through all of it. For 3 years, I'd been anxious constantly. Always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Always wondering what I'd done wrong. Always trying to fix problems I didn't create. But once I stopped playing, once I accepted that our marriage might actually end and I'd be okay with that, the anxiety disappeared. I wasn't scared of her coldness anymore, because I discovered something she didn't know yet. Her power over me only existed because I'd given it to her. And I'd just taken it back. About 6 weeks into this new reality, Sophia finally broke. We were sitting at the kitchen table. She was picking at her food, not really eating, and she looked at me and said, "Why are you doing this?" And I knew exactly what she meant. She meant, why wasn't I playing anymore? Why wasn't I chasing her? Why wasn't I being the manageable husband she'd spent 3 years training, and I looked right at her and said, because I'd rather be alone than be controlled. And I meant every word. That sentence hung in the air between us like smoke. And for the first time since I'd overheard that phone call, I saw something in her face that looked like actual fear. Not the manipulative kind, the real kind. Because she was finally realizing the game was over, and she didn't know what came next. That kitchen table moment changed everything. Not because I'd said something magical, but because Sophia finally understood I meant it. I genuinely would rather walk away than keep living in her control system. The next morning, she didn't try any of her usual tactics. She just sat across from me at breakfast, looking exhausted, and said she wanted to talk. Really talk. Not the surface-level stuff we'd been doing for weeks. I told her I was listening, and she asked me point-blank if I wanted a divorce. I took a long breath and said no, I didn't want a divorce, but I also didn't want what we'd had for the past 3 years. I told her I wanted a partnership where respect wasn't conditional, where intimacy wasn't currency, where we made decisions together instead of her using distance to get her way. And then I said the most important thing I'd ever said to her. I said, if the game comes back, I'm gone. Not as a threat, just as reality. She didn't get defensive like I expected. She just started crying. Not the manipulative crying I'd seen before, but the kind that comes from actual recognition of something you've been avoiding. She said she didn't even realize she was doing it. That her mom had always treated her dad that way. That her friends all operated the same way. That she genuinely thought this was just how you maintain power in a relationship so you didn't get walked all over. I asked her if she thought I'd been walking all over her before she started the control system. And she went quiet for a long time before admitting no, I hadn't. She'd just been scared of losing control. And that's when I realized this wasn't about me at all. It never had been. It was about her own fear dressed up as strategy. I told her we needed help, professional help, because I couldn't fix this alone. And she clearly didn't know how to stop, even if she wanted to. She agreed. Didn't fight it. Didn't make excuses. Just said, okay. We found a marriage counselor the following week, a woman named Dr. Evans, who specialized in communication patterns and power dynamics. And I'm not going to lie, the first session was brutal. Sophia had to sit there and actually articulate what she'd been doing. Had to hear herself say out loud that she used emotional withdrawal as a tool. And watching her face as she realized how it sounded was almost painful. Dr. Evans didn't judge, didn't take sides, just asked questions that made both of us uncomfortable. And by the end of that first hour, we both understood we had months of work ahead of us. The next 8 weeks were weird, like learning to walk again after an injury. Dr. Evans gave us homework, actual assignments about expressing needs directly instead of through manipulation, about sitting with discomfort instead of creating distance, about treating each other like teammates instead of opponents. Sophia struggled hard with it. I could see her fighting every instinct to fall back into old patterns, but she kept trying. There were moments where she'd start to withdraw and then catch herself, where she'd get frustrated and want to punish me with coldness, but instead would actually say, "I'm frustrated right now, and I need some space," like a normal human being. And every time she did that, every time she chose honesty over manipulation, I felt a little bit of hope creep back in. But I didn't soften my boundaries, and that was crucial. I kept going to the gym, kept making plans with my brother, kept existing as my own person, because I needed to know that her changes weren't just temporary adjustments to get me back under control. Dr. Evans actually supported this. Said I was doing the right thing by maintaining my independence. That real change had to happen in the context of me being fully myself, not in the context of me shrinking again to make her comfortable. Sophia didn't like hearing that at first, but eventually she understood that my boundaries weren't punishments, they were requirements. Around week 10, something shifted for real. We had a disagreement about holiday plans. Her family wanted us to come for Thanksgiving, and I'd already committed to my brother's place. In the old system, this would have triggered days of cold treatment. Instead, Sophia took a breath and said, "I'm disappointed, but I understand you made a commitment," and suggested we do a separate visit with her family the weekend after. No games, no guilt trips, no withdrawal, just an actual compromise reached through actual conversation. I almost didn't trust it, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it didn't. She just accepted the solution and moved on. The other thing that changed was her friendships. She started pulling back from Laura and Chloe, the same friends who'd been laughing about control tactics on that speakerphone call months ago. She told me one night that she couldn't listen to them anymore, that every time they'd start swapping manipulation strategies, she'd feel sick, that she'd started seeing how toxic the whole dynamic was. She didn't cut them off completely, but she started setting boundaries, stopped participating in those conversations, started changing the subject when they'd go down that road. 3 months after that kitchen table conversation, we're still together, still working on things, still in counseling every other week. We're not perfect. We still have conflicts, but we resolve them faster now, cleaner, without the games. I didn't lose myself to save the marriage. I found myself, and the marriage got a chance because of it. Sophia is not the same person she was 6 months ago, and neither am I. She doesn't control me. I don't walk on eggshells. We just exist together as two actual people trying to build something real. The other day, she apologized again, unprompted. Said she was sorry for all the years she'd wasted treating our marriage like a chess game. I told her I forgave her, and I meant it. But I also told her I'd never go back to being that version of myself who'd accept control in exchange for peace. She looked me right in the eye and said, "I don't want you to." And I believed her, not because she said it, but because she'd proven it. Through months of consistent change, through choosing partnership over power, through doing the uncomfortable work instead of falling back into comfortable manipulation. I stayed, but not because I couldn't leave. I stayed because the game ended. We're building something new now, something that doesn't require me to shrink or hurt to control. And honestly, that's the only version of this marriage worth having. If someone had told me 6 months ago that overhearing one phone conversation would completely dismantle and rebuild my entire relationship, I wouldn't have believed them. But here we are. The thing she thought gave her all the power turned out to be the thing that almost destroyed us. And the moment I stopped caring about losing it was the moment we both got free. What would you have done in my situation?